Hey, this is Will, and in this lesson, we're going to be talking about DNS in the context of a Kubernetes pod network. So what I want to do in this lesson is just provide you with a little bit of background on what DNS configurations do in a Kubernetes network. If you're not familiar with what DNS is, it stands for Domain Name Service, and what it does is it translates between domain names and IP addresses. So when you go to google.com in your browser, you're actually using a DNS service to look up the IP address that is associated with that google.com hostname. And we need the same service in order to do the same thing inside our Kubernetes cluster. So what does DNS do inside a Kubernetes pod network? Well, first, it provides a DNS service that can be used by pods within the network. So there's a special DNS server that is provided as a Kubernetes service inside your cluster. The second thing it does is it configures containers to use that DNS service that is provided in the cluster. So it provides the service, and it also injects configuration into each one of your containers to instruct them to use that service. So here's a couple of examples of how DNS can be used inside a pod network. You can access services using DNS names assigned to them. So anytime you set up a Kubernetes service, that service is going to be assigned an IP address. However, that IP address is somewhat dynamic. It could change. So it's probably not a good idea to hard code pods that need to access that service to just access that service over the IP address. Because if the IP address changes, then that configuration is going to break and it won't work anymore. Instead, you can have your pods access the service using a host name, and because you have a local DNS inside your cluster, they'll be able to route to that IP address appropriately and be able to access that service using that standardized, static, consistent host name. Not only can you access services using DNS, you can also access other pods using DNS. Every single pod and service in your cluster will be assigned a DNS name that you can use in order to communicate between pods and services. And of course, you can find more information about DNS in the Kubernetes documentation. And what we're going to be doing in this section of the course is we're going to be implementing DNS inside our cluster using kubedns. And that's what we'll do in the next lesson. I will walk you through that process step by step.